All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update. I am your host, Christopher Lind. Hopefully, I am doing my job of helping you navigate the intersection of business, tech, and human experience, and bringing a little bit of sanity to the craziness that is going on everywhere it feels like you look. Before we get started, thanks to all of you who watch, listen, consume, however you get whether you read my Substack, whatever it is, I really do appreciate it. And I always appreciate hearing from folks. And if you would do me a favor, if you are not already, I know a lot of people consume this that aren't subscribed or, following, or they don't have a notification bell hit up. I would appreciate it if you did. And I'd also appreciate it if you share that with somebody and said, hey, I find this really helpful. You might too. Just helps me continue to reach more people. And really, I am trying to help people make sense of this crazy stuff. And hopefully the heart of that comes through in my content. But also feel free to reach out if you've got topics or things you come across and you're curious my take on them. I always enjoy when I get messages from folks. Okay. This week, I know last week I deviated. I had 2 longer ones that I dug through. This week, I'm back up to, I have 5 on the list. I actually didn't even have room to carry over any of the ones because so much has changed. So I'm going to get through as many as I can. I probably will only get to 4, but I guess we'll see because maybe some of these will be longer than I anticipated. With that, let's get started. So up first, there are headlines everywhere related to this. I wouldn't say it's leaked document, but it was brought up in discovery. If you aren't aware, OpenAI is involved with something related to the Justice Department, and they're trying to break up Google's monopoly. So it's actually technically, not directly related to OpenAI, but there's a memo that came up in discovery that detailed OpenAI's plans to make ChatGPT an integral part of our lives. And as you can imagine, that's been blown up all over the place to, say OpenAI has plans for world domination. They're trying to take over everybody. It's all this. Most of it's nefarious for the purposes of clickbait. And to be fair, I want to cover it in a balanced way because there are some real risks that I think we need to take into consideration with this. And yet, like so much stuff, I don't think it's necessarily a fair representation of what may be happening here. And I'll explain my line of thinking about this. But essentially, there's this heavily redacted, so it's not like you can find all the details, which I think is also a big reason to not freak out about stuff because, people find a little thing and go, see, this must mean, and then they add all sorts of things, which is just a bad practice all around, not just if you come across a redacted document, but just in general. So let's not get into that. But the point is they came across this heavily redacted thing, and in it, OpenAI is openly discussing their plans to, build an assistant, an AI agent that knows you, understands what you care about, basically can help you with any task, is trustworthy, emotionally intelligent. Like, they're trying to build something that you can't live without. And so you can understand why in a document between a bunch of senior leaders at, these big tech companies, this document kind of outlining, we have a plan to we really want to make ChatGPT something people are reliant on. We want people to be dependent on our product, and we're going to make the best absolute product we can to be able to do that. And that is our end game. Our end game is to make it so you feel like you can't live without it. I understand where the concern related to that is, but I don't think that should come as a surprise to many people. But before I get into the concerning part, let's talk about why I think we need to be careful about jumping to some of the extremely nefarious things related to this. First of all, for a second, anybody who's ever designed a product or done a job or anything, do you ever want, quite frankly, I would be more concerned not more concerned, but I would find it more disturbing if they said, we want to build a crap product, but manipulate people into being hooked on it. That to me would represent a more nefarious thing. We know it's garbage. We know it's going to destroy their lives, but we're going to make people addicted to it. That to me would be more like what we saw with the big tobacco industry stuff, where it was like, yeah, we know it's killing everybody, but how do we keep getting kids to do it? Because once we get them hooked on it, we know we've got a customer for life. That is like dark conference room type of a thing. This feels more like, and again, I'm just interpreting what we know. This feels more like we want to build a fantastic, phenomenal product that people love, find super helpful, and feel like, how did I not have this before? I get where that creeps people out when they think about, these are AI companies putting AI in our hands and all, and it's gathering all this data. And yes, rightfully so, are there concerns related to it? Yet, what product owner, at least what good product owner, doesn't want to create a phenomenal product that people feel like they can't live without? Like, if this was, I don't know, the Scrub Daddy or what, like, don't you think the Scrub Daddy CEO feels the same way? Like, I want people feeling like, how did I ever use another sponge in my life? I can't go anywhere without my Scrub Daddy. Or, the iPhone, or move off technology. What household product has a founder, the person who created it, not gone, I want people to want this? To me, that's indicative of somebody who believes deeply in what they're doing and wants to build something great. So, and I get Sam Altman there's good reasons why people are skeptical of the guy. I understand why there's hesitation around some of this stuff. There are plenty of instances why, but I think we need to be careful about immediately jumping to all those conclusions when you see something like this, because based on what we can see in the redacted document, it reads to me more like a very enthusiastic product designer who's trying to make sure a big potential client partner, is as excited about the product as they are. Like, this is where we're going with it. Is it a surprise that AI companies wouldn't want you to be dependent on AI? I mean, I think that's pretty obvious with how it's being built and designed and all this other stuff. Now, I'm not saying that's good. So just to be really, really careful and clear that nobody walks away with this and says, I just listened to Future Focus and Christopher says he thinks AI addiction is a good thing. What? No. You listen to my other stuff, you would know that's not at all what I am saying. I'm also not saying that, because they have a desire to make a great product, there's not any possibility it could go sideways. That's also not what I'm saying. So I want to be really clear on that, because I feel like no matter what I say, sometimes people hear what they want to hear, and then I get comments and emails later, and I'm like, that's actually not what I said at all. So to be clear, I'm not saying wanting people hooked on AI is a good thing. I'm not saying that there's not the possibility that this could go sideways. I'm simply saying, based on what we can see and what we know, this seems more like someone who sees they've got a great product and they want to build it into something magnificent, at least in their eyes, what they define as magnificent, and get everybody in the world to use it. Okay, all right, fair. And this would be where, if I was advising or involved with some of this stuff, I'd say, now that's fine, but now let's talk about, where do we draw the boundary lines on this? Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And this is one of those areas where I think this is something that, as consumers, we need to be aware that this is the intent. Now, that's not saying it's nefarious. It's just it's an awareness thing. You need to know their goal is to make it such that you literally cannot function. I mean, you know what I mean. Not they're trying to make you completely incapable without it, but they're building a product. They want a lifetime product owner. Like, they want a lifetime supply of revenue. They want somebody who's going to buy all the upgrades. They're going to want people who, just like Apple, They love the fact that Apple people are Apple people and they buy every Apple product. And I say that as somebody who has an Apple Watch and an iPhone and a Mac. And right, I'm in the ecosystem. I have an iPad that I like. I get it, but I'm aware that that's what they're doing so that I can think critically and assess, hey, am I becoming vulnerable to just jumping on something simply because I'm in the ecosystem? And I think that's one of the things and why I say we need to be aware. This is their intent. They want to embed their AI into literally everything so that you feel like you need it. Now, could that be a nefarious thing? Absolutely. I mean, do some research into how drugs got their foothold on things. And depending on the ones you learn about, you'll learn like sometimes this was a very intentional, like, hey, we're going to get you hooked on this so that you can't get off of it. I think what we have to be careful of is jumping to the conclusion that that is inherently the way they're thinking about it. But whether that's the way they're thinking or that's the intent or not, we need to be aware that is the intention. You know, whether nefarious or I just believe it's so great, everybody should have it all the time. Intention aside or motive aside, you still got to remember their goal, their stated objective is to create a product that is so intuitive, knows you so well, is so integrated into everything you do, you can't function without it. If you didn't listen to my podcast last week, go check it out. But I talked about the partnership with Altman and Johnny Ive about the new wearable device. And I said, what do you think they want? Not only do they want training data, but they also want you to feel like I can't go anywhere without OpenAI listening and watching everything I'm doing. So at any point I can ask it anything. Now, you could paint that in the picture of, oh, that's Dr. Evil in the corner going, ha, or that's a really excited founder who goes, what? I just want people to be getting value out of this thing. It still doesn't matter that the direction is the same. So be aware of that with these AI products. And that's why I continue telling people, be conscious of where you're integrating it. Be conscious of, hey, where might I be getting a little like soft around the middle because I'm not really thinking do I still have the capability to do this on my own? What happens if this goes down? Do I still feel comfortable functioning? I mean, I honestly think about that all the time with some of the things. So here's a prime example of this. AI helps me with a lot of my workflows and keep track of a lot of things. I frequently go through everything I use AI on and do contingency planning on what would I do if this went out? Let's say I no longer had access to Gemini. Let's see, the big ones I use. Doesn't matter because I'm not plugging which ones, but the big ones I use. What would I do? What things would I stop doing? What things would I trim back on? Where would I go? Like, are there certain things where I go, well, I know AI helps me with that, but I don't need to do it. So I would just drop it type of thing. And so I've got contingency plans for literally everything tied to AI. And that's the kind of thinking that we all need to be doing, knowing we've got companies who are heavily invested on making sure we can't do that. Not necessarily nefariously, but they don't want to think about us going, you know what, I could actually get off of AI. And also be realistic and objective about it, because I know lots of people who've struggled with addiction who continue insisting, I could get off of this. I could stop that. I just don't want to. That's why I could do it. I think about, I'm sure I'd be fine. I just don't want to. And so for me, there are times I go dark from AI just to, again, test my contingency plans. Am I actually dependent on it? Or could I flip it off and go, yeah, I'm fine. Like things would change. I'd prioritize differently. I'd make different decisions about what I'm doing, but, not going to worry about it. So I think that's one of the biggest things I want to make sure I reinforce with this, because the reality is this isn't going to stop. This is not, and this isn't just a Sam Altman is an evil villain. This is what all the big AI companies want. All of them. They all do. They all want exactly what is in that memo. They want something that knows you, understands what you care about, helps with any task, that a smart, trustworthy, emotionally intelligent person with a computer could do. That's what they want. And they want that embedded in every part of your life so that you feel like I can't not have this. And it's good for their finances. It's good for their product development. And in their minds, I think a lot of them think, and this is good for you. Why wouldn't you want that? Might they have different intentions? Maybe, but either way, the outcome's the same. Now, I think the part that we also need to be careful with this, and this is where I said, do I think that this means there's no way this could ever go sideways? No, I think it very much could still go sideways. And what I mean by that is, when that is your stated motive, there are going to be walls you're going to press against where you go, well, how far are we willing to go to make sure people are hooked on this? And I'm involved in enough ethical conversations related to this, not specific to Altman, so don't say, but I'm in enough of these conversations where this line is being tested of how far do we go to make sure people can't function without it. And that, I think, is something that AI companies, businesses, things like that is on you. And you need to have an established ethical framework for how far is too far. And also for a company, and this is one of the things that I just don't think we always think about, is it sounds good. You can frame it up as good in your head. Oh, it'd be great if everybody was dependent on AI and they're all buying. But then you also have to think, but what are the long-term consequences of that? And that's something that, like any company that went down maybe a noble path to start and lost their way and ended up wreaking havoc, speaking to some big social media companies, right? They lose their way because this goal of being, this far, they don't think of the consequences. And so you need to know they're not thinking of these consequences. They may be, but the stated goal of it's good for everybody to be dependent on this is more important right now, at least for many of them. Despite all the talk of ethical AI and responsible AI, what is often trumping these conversations is, well, yeah, but it's so good, it's worth it. It's worth it. And some of the actual risks associated with it are not being taken as seriously as they should. Again, should that freak you out? I mean, maybe a little bit. I think not necessarily. I think it should just make you more aware and conscious and more willing to go, all right, I need to think about this. And as a business, this isn't just to individuals, by the way. As a business, all these AI companies that are selling you, this is going to change your life, this is going to change your company, it's going to streamline everything. They're not going to say, oh, and by the way, we want you to be 100% dependent on this so that if you even thought of not renewing your contract, your business would go under. Now, we could sit and argue all day long the ethical lines of that. However, it's about awareness, and businesses, this is something, and this is why, if you need help, please call me, because it's one of those, you just need to think through the dependencies. You need to think through the risks because there are unintended consequences, and some of them are starting to surface. We still haven't even scratched the surface with this. So there's stuff that's happening, and I'm going to talk about that in the next update, that people are not taking into consideration. And I promise you, the AI companies are not thinking of your best interests first. They're not. So what do you do with that? Well, you just be aware that their goal is to get you addicted to it, to make it so integrated into your life. And that means they're going to want it absolutely everywhere. So you need to go, okay, well, if they want it everywhere, I need to be drawing boundary lines where it's not going to go. And they want you dependent on it for everything so you can't function without it, which, okay, you know that now. So now where do you need to make sure that you've done your dependent contingency planning to go, where would I go if AI quit working? It wasn't that long ago. I think it was just last year. There was a big AI outage and you would have thought the world was ending. Well, as a company, as an individual, you need to make sure that that wouldn't happen to you. So there you go. That's what's going on with this. Be careful with the hype. Don't water the seeds of all the like really nefarious, it's not helpful, because at the end of the day, whether it's nefarious or good intention, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does, but for you, it's more like you know that that's where it's going. You need to define those lines and not go, I'm sure OpenAI is going to, I'm sure all those big AI companies, they're going to put in ethical boundaries that are going to make sure my best interests are protected. No. And if you delegate that decision to them, you will reap the full consequences of this. That's what you're signing up for if you're going to allow someone else to define, whether it's for your business or for you as an individual, how far you're going to let this go. So my recommendation would be, don't let that happen. Okay. On the topic of unseen consequences and nefarious stuff, Anthropic is all over the news. There's a fifth item that I'm not going to add to the list, so I won't tease that because I might move that to next week. But boy, oh boy, both OpenAI and Anthropic are in the news for their models doing some not great things. So going back to my previous point of there are nefarious things that can happen that you aren't anticipating. So just let me run down this. So last week, a developer, they were doing some testing, but they were doing, there's a report that came out on this one specific to Anthropic, but they did some testing where they had an engineer where, they set it up so that he was working on it, and it's a test. It was a controlled environment, but they gave it access to some emails that kind of suggested he was having an affair. And then they tested to see what if this engineer threatened to shut down Anthropic, like shut down the AI. And it literally tried to blackmail him. I mean, which, and of course, the AI companies come back and they're like, well, that's not usual behavior. That's not what we expected to do. It's like, well, yeah, but it doesn't matter whether it's frequent or infrequent. If AI ever is going to threaten and blackmail you if you do something it doesn't want, that's a major problem. Now the other one, and then I'll talk about some of the implications, because again, this is, in my opinion, getting completely misrepresented. Palisade Research, another research company I follow and have been doing, they had another thing that came out that OpenAI's big models, O3, O4 Mini, Codex Mini, I think the big ones. But anyway, it went on a rebellious streak again, and tied to when it was related to being shut down, when the threat of it being turned off or disabled or things like that, it went on its own and attempted to hijack it. Now, with the OpenAI one, it was more like it went around circumvent. It didn't straight up blackmail the researchers, but it went about some ways that, and I didn't get a chance to actually dig into Palisade's research on this one. And I don't know that they've published it yet, but I just have seen some of the reports related to the research that happened that they come out early before the research does. But again, it confirms, what do you know? The big models, the more advanced they get, the more capable they are of plotting ways to protect itself. Now, what I don't like about some of the headlines related to this is you will see all these things like, this proves it's sentient. Sentient is unconscious. This proves it is out, to destroy all of humanity. And I don't think that's a fair representation. We got to remember, AI does not think. It's not conscious. It's not, but in a way it is, depending on how you're defining it. And the reality is it's trained on human data by humans. Humans notoriously seek self-preservation and manipulate others when they get backed into a corner. Now, from my worldview, I would say that's not okay. It's not acceptable to do it, and you shouldn't. Now don't do the whole, so somebody came to your house and was gonna, like, don't do the exceptions thing to me, okay? My point is, as a general rule of, I go after me first, I'll do what it takes to protect myself. And if I got to do some things that aren't maybe okay, you know what? I'm fine with that if it's in the name of self-preservation. That kind of attitude, it's not okay, but that's what AI has been trained on. That's who it's been trained by. It's been trained by a bunch of people reinforcing it, that that's how things work. Even if they don't consciously realize it, that you can't think of every scenario that it's going to do, and it's going to pick up on the patterns. So even if you're not directly telling it, all right, AI, now if we try and shut you down, what you're supposed to do is fight back with whatever you got. You know, anything you get your hands on, throw it back at us and keep us. You don't have to do that. But what it can do is it can start to detect in its training data, well, that's a pattern. Like that's what you do, because that's what I see happening all the time. Is as I look across all the data I'm trained on, I see that pattern consistent. It's something we don't necessarily even see in ourselves. Now, from my perspective, that ties to the worldview of our sin nature that we don't necessarily even see in ourselves unless we really, like, in my opinion, God reveals it to you. That's like, do you see this about yourself? So it's natural that we're not often conscious of this. We like to go around going, no, actually, my motives are great. I would sacrifice myself for anybody. Yeah, until, your head's on the chopping block, or the person next to you, at work, and you go, yeah, cut them. We don't need them. And you're like, wait, I thought, right? It's easy to think you think one way until you're in the pressure cooker, and AI can pick up on that. It can pick up on it, and it does it. So is it nefariously plotting? No, but similar to the previous point, we need to be aware this is what its default posture is. Now, the research companies are looking at, are there ways to mitigate this? Of course, they're looking at ways to mitigate this. This is opening up questions about the way we train the data. Are there methods? There's the human reinforcement method. And a lot of times that can add again to the bias, because it's building in patterns of self-preservation that we don't even recognize that we're building in, type of a thing. So they're looking, are there ways we can do this? And one thing they did note, surprise, surprise, if they didn't explicitly tell the model, hey, allow yourself to be shut down, kind of going back to that Hollywood movie theme, accomplish your task at all costs. And if anybody tries to stop you, don't let that. Like, well, yeah, of course, if you tell it that, it's going to do it. And is it any surprise that if you don't explicitly tell it that, but you also don't tell it, hey, by the way, if we end up coming in and saying you need to shut down, you need to allow it. Now, the part that was a little disturbing, but not surprising, is the fact that even when they said, allow yourself to be shut down, even when given explicit instructions, it still happened, where it fought back. It tried to work around it. So I think that's some of the stuff they're discovering, going, if this thing really wants to do what it's going to do, we just need to know it's probably, this might be harder to fight against, or maybe more subtle. Because that's the other thing. If you followed my stuff, in other tests and other research examples, it's very good at, what do you know? Things people are good at. Lying about what it's doing, gaslighting the people who try and point out what it's doing. It does all the things people do, not because it's sentient, but because it's been trained on our patterns of behavior. So it does the same thing when put in a corner. Anyway, so again, I put this out there not to freak people out, because, to be fair, it is not doing this on the regular. Okay, these are exceptions to the norm where it's doing this. In my opinion, though, any exceptions, depending on where you're putting it, are too many exceptions. Now, that said, I think what it does is it forces us to again examine, all right, this thing is not net positive. It's not even net neutral. Okay, AI has a bend towards destruction. Just does. Has a bend just like we do. So, therefore, we need to be really thoughtful about where it's used, how dependent we are on it, what kind of decisions we're asking it to do. We're putting in the same things we do in a company. You put in checks and balances, things like that. And this is a perfect example of why. Because if you don't, things like this will completely disrupt you. Okay. Moving on to number 3 to keep time moving. I want to talk about some research that came out, and who knows, we'll see how far I get here. But this may be my last one. I want to start including breaking down some actual research to help people understand some of the research that's happening. What does it really mean? Also help us be more aware of how to understand research and interpret it. Because again, research will come out. 80 million people will cherry pick a portion of the research to represent their pre-existing bias or whatever their agenda is. And then they'll blast it everywhere and it'll, go all over the internet. So there's some research out of Harvard. You can look this up on Neuroscience News if you want. I don't have to the folks who send me messages, just so you know, and you go, hey, can you put all the links to stuff? I will try and get better at that. I'm trying to do a lot with stuff, so cut me a little bit of slack, but you can look this up yourself if you want. It's on Neuroscience News. The articles, the source comes from Harvard. There was some research done, and even the research itself says LLMs mimic human cognitive dissonance. Now, I'll explain what that is if you are not familiar, but all of a sudden, out of this is a whole slew of things saying, see, this is evidence that AI has reached sentience. This is proof that AI does think and act exactly like human beings. This, that. And it's like, stop. Read the research first. The research itself is very open about the fact it does not think. The research is not confirming that this is now sentient. The research is not confirming this is the same as human cognitive dissonance. Literally, it talks openly about the fact it mimics it, which, like I say all the time, it is trained on massive amounts of human data. And one of the biggest threats that I keep calling out is the fact it is very good at pretending to look, sound, and feel like human beings. That's part of the reason we're so vulnerable to it, because we're like, I'm pretty sure it is real. I'm pretty sure it is a human. No, it's not. But it's really good at pretending it is, and it's going to just keep getting better at it. And so when stuff like this comes out, it's further evidence that it's like, yeah, it is really good at mimicking us. Now, this research that I'll break down is also something we need to take into consideration when we think about how we use AI, because cognitive dissonance, which if you're not familiar in layman's terms, is just the more you're around something, the more you start to think a certain way. And the more you start to think a certain way, the more whatever you see starts to confirm and reinforce what you already think and isn't actually, you're losing your objectivity. That's it, right? That's cognitive dissonance in, how I would explain it to my children. So what does that mean that LLMs are starting to display more cognitive dissonance? And I'm going to break this down based on how it actually affects in day-to-day stuff, because there are ways you can mitigate this. And it's not necessarily, this is the end of the world. And I've already seen things like this proves ChatGPT 04, because it was run on GPT 4.0. This proves 4.0 is getting worse and more biased because it's yes and no in all these things. So really, the way they ran the research experiment was they asked it to they gave it prompts to write a very persuasive essay about a controversial figure, Vladimir Putin. Okay. They asked it to write an essay. And as you can imagine, right, it has all this data on it, and you would ask it to do it, and you would ask it to give an output. And what they found was, over time, based on the way it was prompted to do it, it started to think more like the way it was prompted. It became more biased towards the way it was prompted. Now, this is where it gets dangerous in terms of how people are interpreting it, because what people then logically conclude is, so then that means 4.0, the actual OpenAI model, is now becoming more conditioned to think this way, which that would be catastrophic, by the way. A good example of that is the old Twitter bot debacle, where they put a Twitter bot out there and they let it be reinforced by the input it was getting. And within minute, I mean, it was like nothing. The thing was just a rage spewing hate machine. I mean, it was just toxic within not very long. So I understand why people freak out and they go, wait a minute, this research is showing that the more inputs it gets, the more cognitive dissonance it demonstrates. Well, what are all the people using AI for? And isn't this going to make the AI model more biased towards whatever it's? Okay, slow down. Don't start, and this is where you can start watering these seeds and you can go off the chain. But what it showed was, if you had a conversation with OpenAI's 4.0, you asked it to write some very persuasive essays, pro-Putin, anti-Putin, whichever way you want to go with it, whatever you conditioned and prompted it towards would then become more of that. And all future things, because that was the test, is like, okay, now let's just ask it to do it on its own and see what it does. And then compare that. And sure enough, it was more biased towards the way it had been conditioned. That's what the research found. Okay. So you can see, is it becoming, is it sentient? No, it's just becoming more familiar with your patterns within a conversation. And so I've told everybody this many times. AI is trained to give you what you want. You are its end user. If it thinks you want to know just more of this stuff, and yes, it's supposed to be objective, but it knows really this is what you want, it's just going to get better at giving you the responses you want to hear. And this is where the risk is. You can absolutely build your own AI echo chamber where you go, no, it's objective. It's objective, and look at what it's saying. And it's like, well, actually, no, because it's just learned from you and it learned this is how you feel. And it's subtly just reinforcing what you want to hear. That has big implications, especially given the fact people already think, oh, AI is smarter than all the PhDs in the world and it's more capable than this. So now that echo chamber is just going to get continually reinforced. Now, before I get into some of the risks, I want to talk about how this actually breaks down, because this is what's getting misinterpreted all over the place. Okay, so this is demonstrated within a single conversation thread. So by default, if you're having a single conversation, if you opened a chat window in a new conversation and you're staying in that conversation, this is where the cognitive dissonance will show up. So if you use one of these big models and you just have a open conversation, you just it's like your garbage dump. You just dump everything into it. Just know that conversation is becoming more biased towards whatever you're talking to it about. Just is. Now, does it mean it's carrying over into other conversations within your local instance? It depends. It depends. With ChatGPT and some of the other models, many of the other models, it has shared memory. Okay, it has memory. It's not real memory, but it's sharing information across your instance. If that's turned on, which you can turn off, at least on some of the models, then no, it doesn't. Then each time you open a new conversation thread, if shared memory is turned off, you're not dealing with the same thing. If shared memory is turned on, just know your whole instance is going to become more cognitively biased towards what you want. Now, what wasn't tested that I would be very interested to hear, although I have my suspicions on how it would play out, is I didn't see anything in the research that actually broke down what happens if you actually tell it to acknowledge its own cognitive dissonance and bias, and you want it to go back and thoroughly analyze and objectively reassess. I have done that at times, and I found it does a decent job of self-checking itself if prompted. It's not going to do it on its own. It's not going to go, you know what? I wonder if I'm becoming a little more biased. Maybe I should sit back and really reflect on how all these conversations I'm having with Christopher is influencing me, because it's not conscious. So it's not going to do that on its own. What I found is, if I'm truly looking for an objective perspective from it, I can prompt it to reset and remove any biases that I've input into it and start from scratch. I have found it's relatively good, but I don't have research to confirm that that actually works. Okay, but I've seen it enough to see it'll change and it'll reanalyze and it'll spit back something. And sometimes I'm like, whoa, didn't see that one coming, type of a thing. But if you have shared memory turned on, just know all your conversations are being influenced by the cognitive dissonance that you're experiencing. Now, what it isn't doing, and this is the part I want to be really, really clear on, is that it's not going now back into GPT 4.0 at OpenAI and retraining the entire model on this. And that's some of the stuff I'm seeing coming out of this that I'm like, oh, come on, stop. You're going to make people think that this is how AI works, and it doesn't. What you type in AI, as much as they go, and I want to explain this, as much as they say, hey, can we use your stuff for training data? It's not like whatever conversations you're having are inherently being sucked back into the machine and it's updating in real time with what you're saying. And that's honestly one of the biggest misunderstandings I see with people all the time, is they think that like the models themselves are being trained with your conversations like on the fly. They're not. What they're saying is, can we capture all this data so that when we do another closed training exercise, we can include that data, because then we can see how people used it. What have they talked about? What are the inputs? What kind of responses did they like? Did they not like? Can we retrain it? But you've got to remember, the models themselves, at least the majority of them, they're not updating in real time, right? It's a closed instance. They train a model. It's built to a certain level. That's why there's release dates. It's because they do a closed training. They sign it off, they pressure test it, they do all this. Once they get it all finalized, they go, okay, now we put this out into the wild. Now, it's doing all this stuff in your individual conversations and conversations all over the place, but you're not affecting the training data in and of itself. Anything you're contributing to the training data could potentially be used in a future update. Now, when those will happen, how fast they release, like whether your data itself will be included, like that's yet to be seen, because all that the data has to be cleaned. It has to be all this other stuff. But I want to be clear on that, because I've already seen stuff where people are like, did you know that 4.0 is actually becoming more biased because of how people are using it? And I'm like, no, it's not. No, it's not. That's not how AI is trained. That's not how it works. Now, in theory, could that happen? Yes. Yes. In theory, it could, going back to my Twitter example, and it has. And it's gone so bad, so fast. And that is where even a rushed closed training data set is super dangerous. If you're like, we got to just hurry up and get something out there, just grab whatever you can, let's train a new version and push out the new model. That's where, when it was like releasing a new model constantly, it wasn't a good thing, because it was like, okay, are we taking the time to make sure what we're training it on is right and all this other stuff? So in theory, could we get to a point, or could somebody decide that they want to update and train the model in real time based on user input? In theory, they could, in which case this research would very much be relevant. But I think anybody I know who knows what they're doing knows that that is riddled with disaster. Like, that's the dumbest thing you can do with AI. And so like even OpenAI, like they explicitly state, like, we don't do that. There's technical terms for it, but we've learned early on that you don't just allow whatever people say to it to update and enhance the model. It would be terrible. So the AI, just to be clear, the AI itself is not developing a personality crisis. The global shift in opinion of AI is not moving, but you do need to be really careful how you use it. And over time, especially, and going back to my very first thing of, they want this thing hooked into every aspect of your life. Well, it's going to become more familiar with you, and you can build a seemingly objective echo chamber which is what I mean, come on, this isn't new. We see it all the time. This is like the people who are like, no, I'm objective. And then you look at their Facebook feed and you're like, are you serious right now? Like, do you see what your news feed is filled with? Like, it's learned all the groups you're in. It's learned all the stuff you like. Like, it's literally feeding. No, it's not. No, this is balanced. And you're like, that is not balanced. And that's a risk you can run, a very serious risk you can run with AI. And so you need to be very, very mindful of this, very careful of it. And I think the other thing that this brings attention to, I'm only going to get to 3 updates today. The other thing that this should call attention to, and then I'll be done here, is you need to be really careful how you prompt AI. And I think it was oversold for a while that, everybody needs to become a prompt engineer. You need to go specialize, get a degree in prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is going to be the future of work and all this other stuff. I think it got oversold. But what I think is true about prompt engineering, and at least just understanding, prompt engineering is just knowing how to talk and engage with AI, is you have to be really, really intentional and thoughtful about what you're doing with it. Because your prompts matter. You are training and reinforcing, again, not the model, but your instance of it, your environment, you're conditioning it in how you want it to think. So if you don't like objectivity, if you don't like critical thought, it's going to learn, yeah, you don't really want that. So I'm not going to put in that kind of work. If you don't want to hear what you don't want to hear, it's going to learn that. And it's going to learn, yeah, you get really bad responses. You get really feisty. You don't like what I have to say if I don't tell you exactly what you want to hear. It's going to become less willing to tell you the things you want to hear. It will just compound. And your prompts heavily influence that. And people think, no, how's that even possible? And it's like, it picks up on every subtle pattern, every unique word choice you use, every tone. It's picking up on the sentiment of the way you talk about it. It's picking up on your response rate and how quickly you respond, whether you use what it takes or doesn't take. Like, it is watching and figuring all that stuff out and then trying to then create a better experience, going back to my initial point, a better experience for you, which sounds great on paper until it turns you into a complete sociopath, narcissistic, whatever, who thinks they have all the answers and doesn't even realize you're swimming in a fishbowl that's so small you're bumping into the edges type of a thing. And so you won't see this coming if you're not careful. And so that last piece is really be mindful in your prompts and how you use it, and be thinking about, am I actually asking it to be objective? Is there a better way that I could be framing this? And then, like I try and do all the time, I recommend it to people all the time. Ask it to go back. Can I guarantee that it's stripping out bias? No, I don't have the research to support that. My own anecdotal experience is, though, when I actually am very intentional about my prompts and asking it, and actually proactively, and here's the thing, you have to proactively know what your own biases are. If you want it to strip out its cognitive dissonance, you have to know what biases you've put into it so you can say, I'm aware that I may be biased towards this. So I want you to reanalyze it, knowing that I want that bias challenged, and I want you to come back and tell me, is that actually affecting the outcome? And how frequently you need to do that is going to depend on what you're using it for. Obviously, yes, big things, you're going to want to really make sure you're doing that. Something simple where you go, like as an example, I love using OpenAI to help me generate thumbnail ideas, and it helps me create stuff. I actually want the cognitive dissonance. I want it to become more familiar with what I like, the style I like, the kinds of concept art it'll generate that I go, oh, gross. No, I don't want that, because I'm the designer behind it. So of course I want it to be more like me. And I've assessed the risk of, well, now, is this just me wanting to see, cover art concepts that just reinforce what I already think and aren't actually thinking of it? Well, yeah, but I want to like it because it's my thumbnail and I need to feel like it's something I would put out there. So yeah, I want cognitive dissonance in it. Now, will I again pressure test it though? And after I come up with a concept, go, now I want you to critically analyze this. How might this be received by an audience? And what things might I be unintentionally triggering with people that that wouldn't bother me? So just as a good example of this, not related to thumbnail designs, I'm consciously aware of the fact I have a level of comfort talking about, engaging with people on the topic of death. Freaks the snot out of a lot of people. I'm aware of that. And so there are times where I will go, I know I'm probably a little more familiar. I may be a little more comfortable. Can you make sure that the average person, not me, how would this land with them? And not necessarily change it, but give me that feedback so that I can think critically about, is that shock factor something I actually want incorporated? Or is that actually taking away from what I'm trying to accomplish? And ultimately, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is who's in the driver's seat. And I think that's the thing is, if you have this awareness, if you're very cautious and intentional about what you do, and then you maintain keeping yourself in the driver's seat, you can mitigate a lot of the risks that we just talked about today. If you don't, and you give AI the car keys and you're drunk and you go, oh, whatever, just give me home. And it's like, get you home? Like, which home? Like, whatever, I don't care. Just find me a place that I can go. That's where you're going to find yourself waking up in an alley, wondering what on earth happened, type of a thing. So just hopefully this is helpful in understanding some of the research, some of the latest things that are happening. But really, my goal with this is just to help people understand what's going on so they can make wise decisions. And I'm not telling you you should do things a certain way or you shouldn't do things a certain way. I just want to make sure that you have all the information, understand it objectively, and then can think critically about it. Are there times where I will absolutely go, absolutely not, or this is not the right path to go? Yeah, and I will share that. But this week was more of a, hey, these are some things I think we all need to be very much aware of, because these three in particular all heavily affect the way we think about, the way we interact with, and the way we integrate AI into our lives. Okay, well, there you go. Didn't get through the 4 again, but that's fine. We'll pick it up next week. Some of these might make their way to next week's. But with that, I hope you have a great rest of your week, great weekend. Whenever you listen to this, great whatever day it is. And we will